I'm still reading through this book. I'm sorry, Driving the Green Book, and I'm finishing it up. And what's crazy is these people are still alive. Some of the people that were traumatized in this country through the Jim Crow South and even through the sundown towns of the North are alive to speak about what they went through. Now, I'm about to read some of these stories about what people went through just driving. And these people lived through this trauma. And some families of right now believe that their children are too precious to hear about the history of this country. Well, some of our descendants, some of our predecessors actually went through this history, and we don't have a choice but to know what it was in this country. So I'm going to read some of this. Okay. So this man named Hank Sanders, he was an Alabama senator from 1983 to 2018, told a story about a drive he made one night in Alabama during the height of the civil rights movement. His story sounded and felt like a scene from a psychological horror film. I went down to Southeast Alabama where I was attending this civil rights meeting. There was a white woman who worked with black people at the meeting. When I got ready to leave, some black people at the meeting asked me if I could drop her off in town, 20 miles up north. The very first thing that crossed my mind was that driving at night with a white woman in my car was enough to get me unalived. But I thought about it and said to myself, okay, otherwise they, the organizers, have to drive 40 miles, that's 20 miles up and 20 miles back. And against my better judgment, I decided to go ahead and take her. We hadn't got that far out of town when this truck, the kind that you automatically know has guns in a rack on the back window, came up behind me. It was dusk dark. I made sure that I didn't drive too fast or too slow. The truck kept following me. It would get right up on the rear of my car. When I would speed up, the truck would speed up. When I would slow down, it would slow down. Finally, when I slowed down enough, the truck pulled up beside my car. I just knew that we were going to get shot. But then the truck pushed on and drove on off. Then I became concerned about even going further down the road. As I kept driving, I wondered to myself, should I turn around or should I just keep driving? It ran against the grain for me to not want to take the woman home, but it ran against the grain for me to want to take her home. That fear was so great because so much had happened on those back roads at night. Sanders' vivid recollection shows the deep well of courage and determination black people had to have in order to overcome fear and keep it moving forward. I asked Sanders whether he thought the people in that truck were committing an act of terror against him. His answer was unequivocal. It was definitely terrorism in my mind. There are all kinds of forms of terrorism, but many people would not understand that was terrorism because they don't understand the background. You've spent all of your life being told that even looking at a white woman was enough to cause a problem. So the drivers might say, oh, we're just in our truck. But following us the way they did was certainly an act of terrorism. There are all kinds of forms of terrorism. Sanders' words unexpectedly opened my eyes to the different perspective on some scenes from my childhood. Acts of terrorism can be large or small. I thought about my mother working as a day maid, now called a domestic, for people in Tallahassee, Florida. I thought of the time she would come home steaming with anger at the way one of the white people she worked for had treated her. She would never talk about it. There was no use asking what happened because the anger might turn towards you. Instead, she would go into her room or sit silently in a chair on the front porch and pray on it. Only after my interview with Sanders did I realize that one of the purposes of those weekly Wednesday prayer meetings held at the Baptist church near our home was to help people in my community get in touch with God's divine grace, so they could get through a week of working with or in a world of white people who may have been terrorizing them in small and deliberate ways. Okay, I want to continue this conversation because this is a story about how the trauma can stick with a person throughout the decades. Okay, Crystal Churchwell Evans, who lives and works in Nashville, shared a story about her grandmother that shows how such antagonisms can have lasting effects. My grandmother lives in East Nashville, which is half white and half black, with a definite, clear divide during segregation. Her world was mostly all black, and there was this fear of being in spaces that were predominantly white. We used to pick her up to do Sunday drives. My dad, my mom, and my brother and I would go pick her up. We used to drive in this area called Belle Meade on the west side of town. It's beautiful. We would look at the homes with their beautiful manicured lawns. As we were driving, my grandmother was starting to get a little antsy in her seat. I asked my grandma, "What's going on?" She responded, "Why are we over here?" I explained that we're just going on a Sunday drive. Again, she asked, "But why are we over here?" She was increasingly uncomfortable. Then she kept repeating with more and more anxiety each time, "We need to leave, we need to leave, we need to leave." My dad explained to me that she was not comfortable, so we took a different route. Later, in a similar situation, my dad explained that my grandmother was uncomfortable because Belle Meade was the area you could not go unless you were working there. We had to leave at night. You got on the city bus when you finished your shift if you weren't working in Belle Meade after sundown. The Nettles family, as we have seen, one source of strength was Evelyn's late father, Willie. He imparted strength through his actions and his storytelling. Evelyn describes him as a storyteller with extraordinaire. Evelyn's niece, Anna Nettles, says that storytelling was Willie's purposeful way of showing his caring and love for them. He wanted to impart to his family through words and action the wisdom he had accumulated that could help them in their journeys through life as Black people in America. But there was also another, even more deeply personal intent, as Evelyn explained. I think some of those stories so my brother Michael would be careful. He was in the middle, and he was our only boy. Daddy wanted to make sure that he, my brother, did not do anything that would put him in any danger. So I think that's why he told us many of these stories. I think some of the other stories he told were just because if something happened politically, you just don't know what can happen. He wanted us to be aware of where it came from and where we came from. This is how history gets told because certain people want to continue to sanitize history so that our experiences are blotted off because our stories show who are the bad actors in these stories. This will be my final passage that I read of this book before I turn it in. This book is a good one. You should definitely find this book. It's by Alvin. Okay, so one story that we found amusing, we had to ask her mother if Daddy was lying because he could exaggerate a little. She said, "Oh no, that one's okay." It's about a sheriff in Mississippi. His son has sent away and bought a sheriff's uniform. And even though he wasn't a sheriff, he would use that uniform to antagonize the Black people on Sunday. He would go and pick up his girlfriend in a car. Then while he was in his sheriff's uniform, he would stop Black people, men, and make them dance for her. It was like a minstrel show. One Sunday, he stopped the wrong fellow. That fellow beat him good and made him take that uniform off. Of course, that fellow had to get out of town. The Black people were really scared. Black people came to my grandmother and said, "Miss Essie, we're really concerned because of what has happened here. They may start lynching people." She went to the mayor because she had worked for him in his kitchen. He said, "It'll be okay, Essie. You don't have to worry about anything." She said, "Oh no, the people are really fearful of possible lynchings." He said, "No, don't worry. They must have talked to the white community because nothing happened. But the Black fellow did have to leave." So Black people simply like trying to have some dignity about where they lived were approached like this, were treated like this because some people see us as being pets or entertainment. And for them to just terrorize Black people and traumatize Black people. So keep these stories in mind as we're talking about history and patriotism and why we need to celebrate freedom and all of that good stuff. Because remember that not all of us had the same freedoms to move around in this country. You guys go ahead, jump in the comments. Tell me what you think. Like, comment, share.